Hello and welcome. This is your host, Enrico E. Manalo, with another episode of Intentionally Act Live. Joining me today is my very special guest, Viv Tran, who is also the host of the podcast, What Gives. The mission of all ACEs is to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience in organizations. To go back to Viv's podcast, it's available, once again, it's called What Gives. It's available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. What Gives is a show where Viv has conversations with individuals and organizations that share real stories about how they're changing their communities. So, Viv, you're also involved in philanthropy. Is that correct?
Yep, been in this industry for over 10 years.
What is this shyness that I'm sensing?
I think we were just talking about it, but being experts in your field, you kind of, this field is ever changing. So it's almost like saying I've been in the industry for 10 years, but it looks very different 10 years ago. I get a little shy.
No, I can understand that. I was a teacher for more than 10 years of English, like as a
Oh.
language. And even though I am considered an expert in things like accent reduction, it feels weird to say. And because of my research interests, I guess another one of my areas of expertise is in organizational silence, which is kind of cool, but there's like 6 people in the world that study that. So
So
it's
interesting.
it's
Yes, like
not
don't
some
ask me
towering
questions I
height.
might not know. That's awesome.
But can you tell us a little bit more about What Gives? So I've listened to it. I think it's an absolutely great podcast, and I'm just really kind of curious, like how you got started. I know it's a one-woman show, and that's really impressive. So everybody, I was saying to Viv that Miles and I, Miles, who's behind the scenes, when we started doing this, there was a really steep learning curve, and so to do that on your own, I'm just like so impressed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of YouTubing that happened, but it really, I feel like my guests made it really easy because it was just fun conversations. I loved hearing it back. I loved editing it. So it became very easy. The social media component was also very collaborative.
Yeah.
So even though it's a one-woman show and production, I feel like I get a lot of help from my guests just because they are such amazing speakers, and they already have such engaging content to share, so they made it really easy. But the podcast itself was born out of me just having conversations with people in my industry, and I was like, this is amazing, like I'm moved by these conversations. I would love to share it with 1 to 3 people if I could. And my partner, he was like, you should just, put it in a podcast form. You talk so much, you might as well do a podcast. And so I threw it together. I just started the Facebook and Instagram for it. And then slowly it started to build its own community. And so we finished our first season, and we're hoping to get a second season back up in the next couple of months. But yeah, that's pretty much how it started.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know about you, but doing this kind of work during the pandemic has been really interesting. So years ago, I remember somebody telling me that smell is taste at a distance, and hearing or sound is touch at a distance. And yeah, I don't know about you, but I am a hugger. I've been missing, interacting with people, touching people, and so being able to use my voice to try to reach out and touch people and to be touched by them, I think has been something that's really helped me to weather the pandemic. So I was just kind of curious if any of that's true for you. Does any of that resonate?
Definitely. Yeah, the act of storytelling when you can't be in the same room, I feel like that's why podcasting has grown, and so many people are now listening to podcasts. There's more listening hours. It is very important for these storytelling moments to continue to happen, even though we're apart and we're virtual. Um, So hopefully these storytelling moments can make all the listeners feel a little better.
Nice. So, my general first question to all of my guests is, what made you fall in love with what you do? So we've heard a little bit about how you got into podcasting, but what made you fall in love with what you do as far as philanthropy goes?
Yeah, so I will say I was very idealistic about it, and I was 16 actually when I started my first nonprofit internship. I
Wow.
was gung ho. I was like a crazy high schooler out in front of the Capitol, like the capital of Detroit, with all these ideas that I had from AP US history.
Of
Um,
course.
so that's kind of how I got my start. I always felt like I loved exploring questions about society and social good and what can improve society. That led me to going into political science in college, but it always came back to what are the what are the gaps that the government
Mm,
um, aren't able to fill. And philanthropy is very much supposed to fill those gaps, right? And so that's kind of pretty much what motivated me to go into the space. I think the space is, now that we've become more aware, we realize it's a full product of capitalism. And
sure.
so now I'm very much passionate about the reform and the healing of this space. So
Mm.
I have this, I love being in the nonprofit industry. I think everybody here is trying to solve problems, as with every industry. Um, but just the people that I get to meet here, they keep me going, and they keep, my podcast going. They keep my career going. So, yep, that's pretty much how I got started.
I mean, that's so interesting that you mentioned reform, and I felt that way about so many things. For a long time. Well, when I was 16, I was identifying as an anarchist who was saying that we should, overthrow the government and all this kind of thing. Now I've kind of come around, like, well, if we throw everything out, then what do we have left to work with? And I think that's a
Exactly.
common problem for a lot of people. Um, but yeah, it is an interesting moment to be in this industry, in the industry. I mean, more broadly speaking. So I'm not in the nonprofit world, but I'm still very much in an industry where we are trying to solve people's problems, where we are trying to bring help, where we are trying to use our expertise to help people. And, I'm not always certain that we are accomplishing that. And I think for anybody that's really dedicated to this work, these are serious questions that we have to ask ourselves, or else we run the very real risk of running into the same traps that you've kind of identified for us. So I don't really know if I have a good thought on how to move forward, except to try to link up with other people like yourself who are kind of the same mindset, and to figure things out a little bit more clearly. I don't know.
I mean, I think building community, which you are doing, and sharing stories, which you are doing, is a very key component to cultural change. And I think
Mm.
that's where a lot of our change is going to happen. Um, it's going to take 20 years for the change to be realized in structures, right? But these conversations and employing questions is kind of the solution, even though it sounds like we're creating more problems. Like, these questions are, part of the equation. So that's kind of the thinking that I have adopted, just to have some peace of mind. Because I think our problems are becoming more and more complex every day. They are becoming more paradoxical, right? Like, we have
Yeah.
to consider the future, but we also have to consider reparations and the history of why things are the way that they are. We have to consider all the intersectionalities of it. I mean, there are so many problems. For one, they're all related, and then they become Pandora's box in themselves,
Yeah.
each one.
Right.
So,
No, I
yeah.
think you're right, because if we're not managing ourselves very well, then again we fall into traps, right? So I mean, we can easily fall into that trap of paralysis through analysis. right?
Right.
And that's so easy, especially in this big data paradigm, right? Everybody wants big data, but I think a huge problem there is, do we up here have the processing power to really understand what it is we're seeing, what we can do with it, or do we just kind of like it for its novelty, for the implications of what it could be? And I don't know. That's another one of those rabbit holes. But to kind of pivot back towards the storytelling piece, I wonder if you can start to tell us a little bit about how philanthropy and racial equity overlap, right? So in our conversation leading up to the show, I seem to remember you saying something like, "Well, you really kind of see philanthropy as a means of advancing racial equity." And I also recall kind of having a little bit of a reaction like, wow, but I'm so used to thinking of philanthropy as being a very white thing. So how can this be that these two things overlap with one another?
Right. Well, so philanthropy is a very white thing right
Okay.
now. And I think that obviously needs to change. I think a lot of conversations that I do have, when I say race is at the root of every issue, like, yes, I am pulling all the race cards out. Like, I think race is at the root of every issue. Philanthropy and general equity is is part of that. Like when I think about race, our country was built on the backs and the slavery of Black and Indigenous folks. Like our industries and empires were built on slaves, and a lot of or built on slavery, and a lot of those groups of people, they were race based. So I think, even country lines were drawn based upon race. So our whole society has been built, a lot of it, on race. And I think, for in order for us to solve issues of inequity and try to rectify how our society has been built, we have to talk about race. Like, we have to include race in that. And capitalism and philanthropy was built well philanthropy was built out of capitalism. It at that time, it had a very white savior complex to it. Like,
Hmm.
it really looked like a bunch of white people that had resources having to save people of color who didn't have resources. And right now, I think in our industry, we're trying to break that down, just because we're realizing that the people that we're helping, the people that don't have the resources that we have, they don't have it because it was rigged from the start. Like, we are only comfortable because these people are exploited. Like, we only have Amazon and
Yeah.
all these shipment of goods because someone overseas or someone here is delivering it to us, and creating, and not getting paid enough. Um, so I think we have to acknowledge that piece. When we talk about philanthropy, it's not this top down approach. It's not, givers and benefactors. It's really like we're all in this pool, and it was rigged for some of us. Like, I will say, I'm very privileged, and I have had a lot of advantages, and I realize it's not because of my merit. It's not because of who I am that I have these things. I was just born into a space in the system that allowed me to have these advantages. So I would love to share, and I think that's something everyone could be proud about, is just sharing their resources. Um, we really need to start looking at philanthropy like that, and less in the we are saving people's lives, because why did their lives need saving in the first place?
Mm.
I think at the tail end of my career, well, I mean, my career is not ending, but towards now, I really started to grapple with that. Like, I'm so focused on solving issues. Like, we need to talk about why these issues are here in the first place.
No, absolutely. People often draw the parallel to having to put out fires, but not investigating why fires continue to be a problem.
Right.
And what I'm kind of hearing you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I'm hearing you say is philanthropy doesn't have to be transactional. It doesn't have to be extractive, right? It doesn't have to be rich, privileged people paying for the knowledge that they have pulled somebody out of poverty or saved them or whatever. It can be something that is more akin to a mutual aid network, but perhaps on a different level. Is that right?
I think mutual aid is a newer solution to it, and I absolutely love it. It's very innovative. It invites the entire community to sit down and share resources. I think there is still a space for people who are in philanthropy and people who are white and rich to sit down and have conversations with the community. Like, we're all a part of it. I won't say that we're throwing out the entire system, like you were saying. Like, I could be very anarchist about this industry, but I'm not, because I realize it does take progress. It does take some slow movement. It does take some research for us to be able to do this thoughtfully, and with regard to all communities, because we don't want another community to have to suffer at the hands of us, overthrowing what we've already built, right?
Right.
But we definitely do need to repair it. There's definitely a ton of healing that needs to happen.
So you've mentioned just now that this doesn't have to be top down. And I suppose, implicit in that is perhaps it can be community centric. But
Definitely.
okay, tell me about that, because I'm not in philanthropy. I don't know a whole lot about this. I've seen things, but like, what are kind of the nuts and bolts of this? Like, how do we actually get a community to do community fundraising, for example?
I think we're still trying to solve this problem.
Okay.
I would encourage everyone to read the community centric fundraising blog. They
Hmm.
CCF. They also have an amazing Instagram that, with little tidbits of information if you're just needing to scroll. Um, they have so much great information. They're dismantling a lot.
Mm.
And there's a ton of solutions that are new that have just been thrown out. Like, the industry is changing so fast. Um, I would encourage everyone to look it up. But I think it does start with, like I said, realizing that there's no givers, there's no takers or benefactors, that we really have to sit down, like, as a community, and realize, like, these resources were never mine to start with. Like, we need to share if we're going to get everybody through. And
Mhm.
that's essentially what community is. Mutual aids are doing an amazing job at it. They invite anyone and everyone to their meeting. You just have to contribute what you can. If you can't, you're there. Like, people will give you what you need. It's very much like Burning Man, if anyone knows Burning Man. Like, there's no trade happening. Like you said earlier, there's no transaction. It's purely like, this is ours. And, like, take what you need. I'll give what I can. I'll take what I need. And together, like, there's enough. There is enough for all of us. Um I think that's this myth that we've come up with.
So the
There's
myth
definitely
of
enough in America. Like, let
right,
me tell you that.
that myth of scarcity, right? That
Right.
again is what capitalism functions on. There's actually quite a lot of abundance in many areas. And to kind of clarify something that you said, because our audience unfortunately is not burners, that is people who attend Burning Man, which I understand has been happening this year, although without the official support and vendors and things. But to be quite honest, I have not been to Burning Man, but my
Me
partner
neither.
has. And so, if I understand correctly, people do not exchange money for the goods and services that they need while they are inhabiting Black Rock City. That's the name of the location. And so it is a barter system, but it's less crude than a simple exchange, I think.
I think it's like, I wouldn't even call it a barter system, because there is no expectation of, like, a trade, right? Like,
Mm.
if someone has food at their table and you're hungry, like, go ahead and take it. Give your gratitude, your thanks. And then that person could be wandering, they could need a bike, and your bike's right there. Like, I think that's, like, the intent. Obviously, Burning Man has become, like, a completely commercialized thing. I've never been, but now there's like pictures and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think it was sort of an experiment on society. Um, I think we could learn a lot from that experiment. I truly believe mutual aid is now doing it outside the festival grounds, and they've been doing it forever. Like I talk about it like it's a new thing, but communities have been, you know, stocking pantries, stocking free libraries for each other for a very long time. And
Right.
it's actually very native to our lands, to American land before capitalism took over everything.
Well, yeah,
So,
I mean, it also seems like in our collective pop culture memories, there was also a point in time in American culture, at least the culture that we showed on TV, where neighbors could walk over to one another's house and ask for a cup of sugar. Like that's what we're talking about, but on perhaps a larger scale than that. But the idea is really just to be able to provide for one another. Is
yeah,
that right? Yeah.
we need to bring that back. Um, yeah, and I think people have such um, strict guidelines to how to give back when it's just as simple as that. Um, and I think this is like also a big change in philanthropy. Like we have so much red tape, right? Like we look like the government, and that's why it's called the nonprofit industrial complex. Is because we look like the systems that we're supposed to be helping people that suffer from that system. Um, so yeah, I think giving has been made to look very complex. We talk about who deserves it. We talk about scarcity. Like those really shouldn't be part of the conversation. Like we should be providing resources for everybody, mostly because we do have it.
So you mentioned just now the nonprofit industrial complex, and I wonder if you could take a moment and explain to our audience who might not know what that is, like what it is that you mean by that.
Sure. It has we throw around the term a lot, and I'll call it NPIC, but
Mhm.
it's basically the relationship between nonprofits and government and business, and the relationship involves, you know, control, authority, surveillance, because we work together, right? And we kind of need to appease each other and the stakeholders or whatnot. So there is some authority in place. There are some red tape in place, and because of that, the nonprofit industry and philanthropy in itself looks very much like just like I said, it looks like the government. It looks like other businesses. It's very top down, um, and it's it's almost made to keep the system of inequity in place. You know, like if we provide funding to a community, and once they are, you know, they have just enough, we cut it off. Like
Mm.
we're keeping the supply. We're not really helping them thrive. We're keeping them in their place.
I
And I
see.
think that's a really big part of the nonprofit industrial complex. And then
So
there's also
homie's
the
cool
question. Oh, sorry, go
mentions
ahead.
that sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
His comment or their comment, I'm sorry, was sanctions on life giving. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were saying, but that's a reaction. I don't know if you care to respond.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Sure. So the comment was that philanthropy is sanctions on life giving.
You know what? I would agree with that. There are sanctions there. I don't know what life giving means. Maybe it
I'm
just
not
means.
quite sure, but homie's cool. If you're out there and you feel like elaborating, please do, and we will address it.
But yeah, I just the word sanctions. It is, you know, very true. Like I think if you talk to anyone in the industry, they'll be like, there's a lot of red tape. And there's things like restricted funds and unrestricted funds. And I'm like, why do restricted funds even exist?
Yeah.
So it's NPIC is very much very present in the industry. People are becoming very aware of it, which is really great because now we can start to work on dismantling it.
So, in our lead up to the show, which was a very short turnaround, so thank you so much for signing off on things. But we got a comment online from a friend of ours named Ashok Panikar. He runs an outfit called Metaculture, and his question was, "How do we know we are not ourselves part of this industry?" So, this industry being the NPIC.
I think we are very much a part of this industry. We benefit from this. We're either benefiting or we are essentially slaves to this complex, right? So I think we're all a part of it, and it will take most of us, a lot of us, to break it down. But yeah, my sister always says like when we're out grocery shopping or something, she'll be like, even just buying this apple, like nothing is ethical under this system. And
Right.
she's a really funny person. But to some degree, it's like when you hold that apple, you're like, what went into this? And when I buy it, where is my money going? Like there is a lot of ethics that falls out in the exchange of goods and philanthropy even and just living in this space. So I think we are all a part of this complex, and that's kind of why we all need to do our part in getting out of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that brings me to what are the challenges that you're really seeing to racial equity as far as philanthropy goes? All right, so it sounds like what you're saying on some level is that the nonprofit industrial complex is stems very much from white supremacy culture. And so there are dynamics. You mentioned that sometimes philanthropy cuts off aid just to keep people in their place, right? And so I don't know, like just kind of digging a little bit deeper. You mentioned before that philanthropy can be a way to advance racial equity, but if it's also rooted in white supremacy culture, how do we navigate that gap? How do we reconcile that for ourselves? Like as people who might have strong beliefs, we also have to make a living, so we've chosen certain fields, and we're really, we're really dedicated to reform. We also have to satisfy our bosses, draw that paycheck.
Right.
Ooh, what do we do?
Yeah,
Or what's on your mind as far as what we can do?
like I had sort of like this an issue brought up to me that's similar. It's like the oil and gas industry. It employs so many people in Texas and in rural parts of the country. And if we went green all of a sudden, like these people are, SOL. Like they're gonna have a really hard time. But we have to do our part in saving the environment. And it kind of sounds like your question, like if we are going to completely break down how philanthropy has been and how every industry has been, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And change hurts, but I think the reason why I kind of stress going about progress in a very thoughtful, mindful manner, even in a very slow manner, which I know is not popular, is because I don't want a lot of people to get hurt in the process. Um, but my immediate answer or thought to your question is there are, like I said, mutual aids that are out there that are doing a bunch of nonprofits that are really mindfully taking into consideration the funds that they get,
Hmm.
where they get it from, who they employ, and how they interact with the communities that they are going to be sharing these resources with. Um, so I think when we slowly do it together, philanthropy, nonprofits, mutual aid, social entrepreneurs, small businesses, like every industry, if we just slowly do it together, we might be able to weather this change together, but also come out with something completely new. And it sounds like I'm talking out of like a Disney movie, but I really believe like the world looks a lot better than it did, I think, a few years ago. Maybe not in terms of the environment,
Yeah.
but in terms of, human rights. And we do have drawbacks. We have laws that have been overturned that are meant to protect us, even today. But I think if we keep fighting and we keep moving forward mindfully, thoughtfully, and not get so desperate to holding power so that we could see the change that we might want to see,
Mm.
I think we really could come out of this with a better looking philanthropy industry, better looking tech industry, better looking every industry if we're able to do it slowly, thoughtfully.
No, the idea of speed, that concept that we need to slow down, it's one that I'm encountering more and more. And reflecting on it, I'm not really sure why we're moving at the speed that we do, right? And I don't just mean figuratively, right? So I saw an article from I think it was the 1920s, and people were upset. And they were writing in a newspaper. They were very upset because there was a proposed speed limit that was causing some upset in the community. The speed limit was 20 miles an hour, and people were saying like, well, people are not going to be looking out for pedestrians or anything like that. Of course, 20 miles an hour today is absurdly slow, right? But for back then, already they were thinking of the same kinds of things. Um, the fact that industry moves as quickly as it does, right? So you get a new phone every couple of years, you get a new computer, you gotta get trained on all the latest technology and whatever for your job. But why? Right? It's not something that seems to enter into the equation as far as our national conversation. Speed is good, new is good, newer is better. Let's spend some money, you know? Um,
Yeah, it's we're moving very fast right now. And speed is very good when you think about like all the problems that we're able to solve, like physical problems or like getting someone out of a stuck building or I don't even know, but speed is very good. But I think a lot of people have anxiety and I think industries have anxiety because of it. And people are adopting new ways of slowing down. And I think this is really, really cool. People are looking back at how indigenous folks do things. And there's a lot of wisdom there. Meditation has been a practice for centuries, and now more and more people adopt that practice into their lives. I think COVID has had a hand in slowing some, for privileged folks, slowing some things down, um, which helps to heal some things. I think you're right. It's been a very fast world, and we need to adopt some speed into our solutions, into healing, and into moving forward for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the threads in the conversation are being intentional, being mindful, and being able to pick and choose things rather than having to react and to choose the best solution that we can see at the time, which is what Dr. Martin often refers to as bounded rationality, right? So we think we're making the best choice, but we're only making the best choice out of the options that we currently see, which often is not the best choice. I want to pivot now back to the comments. So Homie School has elaborated on what they meant. So the red tape, the systemic restrictions on giving, even in the personal or industrial senses, are the ideas held and biases held on who deserves water, food, clothing, shelter, not philanthropy itself, but the ways that it is played out, who runs it, how status quos are gate kept. So I think, yeah, that speaks a lot to what you were mentioning, Viv, for sure.
Yeah.
A friend of mine from grad school chimed in. Hey, Amani. She says, hi, Enrico and Viv. That is a great question and is one I grapple with on the academic side of nonprofit management / philanthropy. It takes mindfulness and intentionality. There we go. Yeah.
Completely agree.
So interesting. The conversation's continuing in the content in the comments rather. The thoughtful mindfulness is important, but the balance to that idea of shifts in power and need or desperation for change is relative to the life needs and circumstances that impact people's need for speed. Sometimes pausing and moving slowly can actually leap ahead faster. Yeah, so I think that speaks to the complexity that you raised earlier. It's not only this awareness that we can be doing things in different ways, but when is the best time for us to be doing that, and when is it in fact a good time for us to use something in the that's already in the toolbox? And that's not always clear. I know that as somebody who has been acculturated to a capitalist society, and as I was just saying, I know that new is better, fast is really good, and if it comes in red, like so much the better, right? But I guess this gets back to consumption, right? So how do we do things in a way that are not just endlessly extractive or grow endlessly, like in biology? And I was not a good biology student, but
Me neither.
it's my understanding that that is what we call what was that again? Oh, cancer. Yeah, cancer. Right. That's not good. Uh,
um, yeah, you're right. I love the word extractive, um, because sometimes even when we're producing this show, like, are we taking more of people's time than we are contributing? Like, I have these questions in the back of my head. I hope it's we're engaging in a way that helps people. But um yeah, like, I it brings to mind my favorite quote in the whole world. I don't even know who says it, but I always say it. And it's just like, live simply so that others may live. And like, if I really let myself, I could really like nice things and new things and faster things and just jump to conclusions and jump to solutions and be like an early adopter and a thought leader and all of these things. But in the end, is it extractive? Is it really for my ego? These are like the questions I hope people can have conversations about with their friends, their families, themselves, because I think in this world of consumption, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I think it lends a hand to our paralysis, because there's just so much. And then it also lends a hand to our anxiety. And it's very hard to move and solve when we are in a constant state of anxiousness.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, before I went to grad school for conflict resolution, like so many people of my age, I thought I would go to law school. And fortunately, a family friend kind of took me aside and mentioned that he runs conflict workshops. He'd love for me to attend, and that really kind of created a space for me to pause and reflect on what it was I actually wanted. Right. So my immediate need was I don't have any money and I need to make some. So what else can I consume so that I can get more? Right.
Yeah.
But, along the way, I had, people telling me like, "Well, I know what kind of person you are, Rico, and I know a lot of lawyers, and I'd hate to see you get crushed in the way that I've seen so many well-intentioned, smart, funny people." Not that they were saying this about me, but just like I've seen other people who had these qualities who were crushed by that profession. It seems to be a really difficult row to hoe. Um I guess, in this thread of more and more and more, and like, how do we sit down and figure out what we actually need? We had another comment come in from Twitter, again from Ashok, which was, can money actually make things worse? And the example that he brings up is peace building, particularly after 9/11, which the anniversary of which is coming up very soon, in fact. But peace building around the world kind of got stalled in a just kind of a paradigm of let's just keep throwing more money at it, and we're kind of seeing that, well, Afghanistan is a reality, so how effective was throwing all that money at peace building? And by peace building, I don't mean a euphemism for peacekeeping forces or anything like that. Peace building's an actual field in its own right.
Yeah, and to answer that question, I think I don't think I have an answer to that question. Um, and I think money is like such a, like, we could look at it in so many different ways. Like, it could really be a philosophical thing, or we could look at it as a social resource or a social contract or whatnot. It can be very harmful. I think that it is. But right now it's what we have and what holds a lot of power. And so we have to be very careful with it. And so I think, you know, hopefully this isn't like saying anything about the government, but I think we have been careless about the way that we've allocated our money in the past, and it affects us today. And this gives us an opportunity to reflect and be like, okay, well, like, let's not throw money and make things worse. Like, let's learn from history. Let's try something new. Like, we could slow it down if we need to. Um, yeah, I think money can make a lot of things worse. It's not going away though. So we got
Yeah.
to figure out a way to work with the social currency, or I mean, the currency that we have put so much power in.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we've brought up mindfulness and intentionality in this conversation. The more that we kind of understand ourselves and our needs, then the better that we can kind of understand where other people are coming from as well. You know, to a point, and with I'm hesitant to say appropriate training and everything like that, but I guess my point here is, by being really thoughtful about it, then we can come to more thoughtful conclusions rather than having to go out and get a whole other degree and whatever so that you can engage in the good parts of what we're talking about.
I think so. And I think if you don't find much, or you're feeling very lost when you look within yourself, I think the best other way to look within yourself is to serve others.
Mm.
Like, I think the people around us can be direct mirrors of who we are, how we react to the things they say or do, the things that bug us, our pet peeves, how we react to different environments. This is why I think traveling is really big, but I know not everyone is privileged or have the resources to do it. But just putting yourself in different communities and spaces, I think, even though it doesn't sound like sitting there and meditating and like like learning about yourself just in your brain, it will force you to learn a lot about yourself. And then when you do, you should take the time to reflect on that. And even then, reflect on the situation that you're in and how you would react to it. Maybe you have a solution that we haven't already come across.
So it sounds like what we're talking about is kind of making meaning, right? Which I think also plugs into how do we avoid a situation where we're just blindly throwing money at stuff, right? So how can we reframe things or take a new direction so that we can meaningfully contribute as people, as philanthropists, as people who are part of the NPIC, the nonprofit industrial complex. Um, so I wonder, in your time working, what are your thoughts?
I really believe that you could find meaning in absolutely everything that you do. I just like came across this Humans of New York post, and it's this super happy person who works at like a convenience store, I think.
Oh,
And he like makes people's day. He loves his job. He like has a smile on all the time. He has truly found meaning and joy in what he does. And I think if everybody could do that, like, the world would be so much more of a better place. Like, every job is so crucial in keeping our society standing, in helping our families get by, in raising our children. Like, every single role is so pivotal. But if you don't find meaning in your role, you can either create it or you can leave and find um, find another space that speaks more to you. I think everyone should do the inner work. And I say this, but it takes so much privilege to do it, right? Like if you are stuck in your job and you don't have time to get an education to move from it, or you don't have time to job search, like I know a lot of people in those situations. And so it takes a lot of privilege to even do this. Um, but in the space that people stand, like do what you can, have gratitude, and like be proud of yourself because you are assuming a role in society that really uplifts others. I think that's important for people to note and to like just remember, because literally every role has meaning. Um, yeah, yeah. And if you have the opportunity, like like I did, and I joined the philanthropy space, like let's talk about sharing resources now so that other people can have the opportunity and the advantages that we were given.
Yeah, and just kind of reflecting on the things that you were just talking about. I think for me, one of the biggest values of diversity is that we can explore other ways of being, other ways of making meaning.
Mhm.
Because and I don't think this is an intentional thing at all, but cultures are, on the whole, are motivated to continue existing, and often that means doing things in a certain way that works for the dominant groups in those cultures. Now, I think it's really easy to be suspicious of cultural change, to kind of walk too far on over the line of wanting to preserve certain things um, at the expense of new ideas and new ways of being. But this kind of brings me back to resilience, right? So if something is so rigid, if people can't let go of something and ultimately it fails, well, then they kind of end up going down with that ship, right? But if you are adaptable, if you are able to be thoughtful about what you can preserve or what you want to preserve, as well as, being adaptable in the face of making meaning among new factors, then there's hope in that, right? There's not so much hope in other ways. Uh,
Mhm.
that I can see, but that could be my own bounded rationality talking. Uh,
I do love what you said about upholding tradition and how it can be detrimental, but it is so important, right?
yeah.
I think that like that is how I think I don't know if a comedian said it or I got it out of a movie, but the push and pull of traditionalism and like new age, I think that's what creates culture. And I
Mm,
love the debate and seeing it happen, even though, it could be very painful, and the cultural gap between our family generations and our parents, like it could be very painful, but there is so much hope in that gap, that we have between each generation. And I love to see it. I love the conversation surrounding it because at least we know we're moving forward, right?
yeah.
Like, and it also gives us an opportunity to be brave about moving forward. And for our parents, I've seen my parents change so much, and it's like I recognize how brave it is for them to do it. Um, but yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, I'm curious about that because I know in my own experience, my parents are from the Philippines. I was born here. And like Vietnam, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I lived in Vietnam for about 5 years. So I was
Oh, that's
able to
awesome.
see a lot of similarities. Also in the Philippines, we have big extended families and everything like that.
Uh-huh.
So when my parents came here and they had me, they didn't have the child rearing capabilities that they had become acculturated to, right? There weren't 25 brothers and sisters to hand me off to when they needed childcare. There's this thing called daycare, which is a whole different beast. And vaccinations and like all these other pieces that
So
they had no
expensive.
idea how to navigate. And it really kind of came to a head when I was a teenager, as it does. And I remember this very vividly because the conversation was, why can't you be a good Filipino boy? And for me, it was like, I don't know how to do that because I only speak English and I was raised in New Hampshire. So I don't know what your expectations are. How can I be that? And it wasn't until we had that kind of confrontation that some like more understanding started kind of creeping in for all of us, right? And that was very, very painful, and that took years. But now at 36, I have a fantastic relationship with my parents.
Yeah. Yeah, and those conversations, I don't know about you, but I feel like it enriches my life and also enriches what I do. Like when I go to work, I think about all the things that made me a bad Vietnamese kid, but also made me an American kid. And a good Vietnamese kid. And I bring that, I can be prideful about those things. I can share those things. And I could, it just makes it just enriches my life, and adds more to it. So I think that's kind of why tradition and the
Yeah.
fight that we have is just
Yeah.
so important. And when we talk about organizations and them keeping their practices, or cultures and mutual aids keeping their practices, like it's going to change in a few years, decades. Um, we have to hold on to the things that has kept us going, brought us together. It's very important. I think tradition is very important, and I'm the one that is always trying to throw everything out.
Yeah, it took me a while, but I'm coming around on that front as well.
It's because we're getting
Uh,
older. I'm just kidding.
Shh, we're both Asian. We could be any age,
At
really, right?
any age, any age.
So Imani has another comment, and this also gets to something that we preserve from culture to culture. Money is a needed resource, undeniable fact with the way we live now, and for many cultures in the past. However, I think the strategic plan in that example was not well thought out. So I believe that Imani is talking about the one I offered up of peace building after 9/11, and rather impulsive. And because every few years there was a shift of thinking also played a role. Shift of thinking perhaps could be coming from, our political climate, what have you. It goes back to the point you made. They made a choice based on what information was given under certain pressure, right? So now we're back to bounded rationality once again, and they may not have been the best choice. Yes.
Right.
Oh, Cora, who is a friend of my parents, actually, and she had an earlier comment about me being an anarchist because she invited me to a group of Filipino American Democrats, which I am a part of. But she says, I think a dialogue between parents and children would be fascinating. We often had reflections with our daughter.
Oh.
Yeah, that could be the fodder for a future show for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of wisdom to be had there.
Yeah, so I mean, getting into these conversations is not comfortable at all, right? And but we also know that if we don't embrace that discomfort, then we also don't get the kind of change that we're after. And that's a hard thing, right? Because it's scary. It's like deeply and truly scary, like 99.9% of the time.
I think
Uh,
our conversation, those scary conversations we have with our family, really mirrors the conversation we're going to have with our other authority, which is our government and society. It's going to be super uncomfortable. There's going to be pushback. But it needs to happen, and it needs to happen in a non-Twitter. Like it can't happen on Twitter. Like there's only what, I don't even know how many characters you're allowed, but that's like not enough. And that it only lends itself, it's like made for fighting, right? Like you can
yeah,
only have
right.
these many words. um so like I think these conversations are so important. um and yeah, and our, I really think we should be having them with our leaders,
Yeah.
also not on Twitter. um yeah, they're
No, I mean, to your point, I think that Absolutely true. And what I've been reflecting on is a crucial component of this is how do we have these conversations where everyone can keep their dignity, right? Because the Twitter model is not only blame and shame, but let's cancel that person. Like, hang on, that person is really alive. They've got like real problems. They're not everything that we see. There are a lot that we don't see. And if you want to be listened to, if we want to be taken seriously, if we want to really engage with people that don't think like us, we have to figure out how we can be preserving one another's dignity. Because
Right.
if we are not seen as worthy of respect in each other's eyes, then why would we work together? It doesn't make sense. Like, that's a fundamental principle of democracy, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And without dignity, that goes down really deep. Like that often precludes any further relationship when we are in a situation where somebody has violated our dignity. So I don't know, we've got only a little bit of time, but if you got thoughts on that point, I'd love to hear them.
I it makes me think back about when we were kids and we talk about bullying and how bullies are created from bullying. And so we have to be very careful when we are ourselves being bullied that we don't let anger become the only language we speak or who we are. And then for the bully, we have to recognize that if someone's bullying us, like we look at them, we have to realize like what is it in them that we need to heal. Obviously, it's no one's job.
Hmm.
Like if like everything that's been happening to certain communities, they have the right to be angry at the bullies. They do not have to heal these bullies at all. It's not their responsibility. But if we have the bandwidth and the time, the rest of us, we really need to be looking at why, like, what has created these bullies in our society. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of great lessons that are in cartoons and like grade school, and we like forget them when we grow older. And I think about that a lot because when I am at my worst, I know there's so many things that I can justify, like, oh, it's because I was having a hard time or someone was giving me a hard time. That's very human. Like, and obviously I shouldn't justify when I'm being a horrible person, but it's just very human. And I feel like if we can continue to keep the human dignity within each of us, like you said, like our conversations would be much more productive. We could maybe actually solve the problems that created the bullies in the first place or created the bullying that affect us in the first
Yeah.
place.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's worth noting that people that tend to oppress others come from cultures where people are oppressed. And yes, that's true. Most cultures oppress someone. That said, there may be ways where we can at least minimize that oppression, right? Or at least leave the door open for the hope, the possibility of changing that. And that might not sound like a lot, but I think that's really important, especially now because we're reaching a point in time where a lot of things kind of seem hopeless. And we know that despair is something that really can tank any efforts to do better or to do good. The last thing that I kind of want to say before we get into our last question is this question of dignity is one that we've been thinking about a lot at All Aces. And actually, next week, we've got a free public dignity activity. And this is an experiential simulation where we kind of give people the opportunity to walk in others' shoes. So we hear that a lot, especially as kids, but we forget it all the time, right? And how often do we really have the opportunity to sit down and say, you know what, Viv, I want to walk a mile in your shoes. Like
Yeah.
let's block out some time. Let's get it on the calendar. Let's do it. That's never happened to me ever. But that is the great thing about this exercise. It is completely free to the public. We will be dropping a link into our comment sections at some point. Miles, I realize that I'm asking you to do this on the fly. So yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you, Miles.
Yes, thanks, Miles. And so our kind of standard closing question for you, Viv Tran, is what would you love to see come out of your work? And that can be podcasting, that can be philanthropy, that can be whatever.
That's a hard one, but I do want to continue to hear different stories, different solutions. Like my podcast is not all about organizations. It like if you are out there doing something in your community by yourself, like picking up trash, I'd love to hear about like how you motivate yourself, what your dreams are. So, I think my hope is to continue to hear other people's stories, share their stories, and allow them to live out their dreams and their goals.
Love it. If everyone watching hasn't checked it out yet, please go do so. That's What Gives, available on all the major podcasting platforms. I've listened to it. I think it's fantastic. And I'm just so thrilled that you were able to join me here today, Viv. Thank you so much for helping us to peel back the curtain on what's going on with philanthropy and the
Awesome.
opportunities to advance racial equity.
Oh, thank
Any
you.
final thoughts?
Thank you so much to you and to Miles. This is a great, I love your podcast as well. And the conversations are always so amazing, even offline.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks again to all of our commenters. Really enjoyed that interaction today, and we'll see you next time. Till then, I'm Enrico E. Manalo, and this was Intentionally Act Live.